So hello, everyone. How's everybody doing tonight? My name's Steve Hoyer. I'm the Assistant Vice President at NYU. I do government affairs for NYU. So I'm thrilled to have the honor tonight to welcome everybody to NYU DC for this dialogue between Senator Tim Kaine and Governor Ralph Northam, both from the great state of Virginia. So I've been fortunate enough to be at a lot of events in this auditorium, I think for the last 6 years or so since the building started, but I've been looking forward to this one for weeks. I think this is going to rank up there as one of our better events. So tonight's event is a part of our programming for NYU, the NYU DC Global Leadership Scholars, and two of these students will be moderating our discussion tonight. Many of you know them. It's Andreas Strandgaard from our NYU Shanghai campus and Warda Malik from our NYU Abu Dhabi campus. On behalf of everybody at NYU, I also want to put out a special thanks to NYU trustee Ronald Abramson, who knows both the governor, both the senator, and invited them to participate in this event. And I don't think Ron's here tonight, unfortunately. So I'm not going to go into both of the governor and senator's full bio. They both have extremely impressive resumes. It would take me far too long to go through all of it. But I just want to note that neither of them are career politicians. Both started out working on behalf of communities, trying to improve lives at the very local level, just the type of people we really want in politics, in my opinion. Before he was elected in November, Governor Northam served as an Army doctor, a pediatric neurologist, a business owner, state senator, and then lieutenant governor. Before getting into electoral politics, Senator Kaine served as a missionary, a civil rights lawyer, a teacher, and we're proud that the senator also has an NYU connection. His daughter graduated from NYU Tisch last year. Now she's living in New York City. So thanks, everybody, for being here. And now I'll turn it over to Andreas and Warda to start the discussion. So come on out, guys.
Good evening.
Hello.
First of all, thank you so much for joining us here today. We're all very excited to have you. And before we begin, I will turn to Andreas to outline a few house rules and then begin the discussion.
Perfect. So a few things. First of all, mobile phones, please turn them off or silence them. If you want to use Twitter, use the handle at NYU Washington, DC. If you take images, please no flash. And at the end, there will be a Q&A, which we will announce, and a microphone will be passed around. Thank you. So we're sitting with an audience today of young people who are all aspiring to be leaders within various fields, including politics. So we're all looking forward to a life full of experience, like positive experiences and challenging moments, and with hopes of creating positive change in the world. So to begin our conversation, I would like to ask both of you what some of your most meaningful achievements have been, and how did that align with your college aspirations and when you were in your 20s and what you thought about the world back then?
Well, thank you so much, Andreas and Warda, for leading the discussion. And thanks so much for you all taking time. I know you have a busy schedule, and it's just great to see people that are interested and involved and want to make a difference in our country and world politics. So Tim and I have been looking forward to being with you, so we appreciate the opportunity. I started in the Senate I ran in 2007, and my mentor was this gentleman sitting to my right, at the time Governor Tim Kaine. And I had always wanted to help people. I'm a physician, a child neurologist, so I've taken care of a lot of sick children. And I always knew that cigarettes and tobacco products were not healthy. And literally the day after I was sworn in, then Governor Kaine came to me and said, Ralph, I have talked and listened to a lot of people across the Commonwealth of Virginia, and they would really like to be able to go into a restaurant and not be exposed to secondhand smoke. And he said, you as a pediatrician would be a good person to patron that legislation. And so it was my first day. And if you can imagine the influence that the tobacco industry has in Virginia, if you look at the history, it was literally like jumping in the deep end. But when the governor, asks you to do something, you say, yes, sir, or yes, ma'am. So we actually worked together on that. And in 2008, the piece of legislation was passed in the Senate. As we say in Richmond, it caught a fever when it got down to the House. They felt it was too much government in our lives, and they defeated it in '08. And so I reached across the aisle and tried to educate folks about the ill effects of smoke. And I went back with the same piece of legislation in '09. And my part of the discussion to them was, you know, I understand what you're saying about too much government in your lives, but it's also government's job to protect people. And we knew that a number of individuals were dying each year in Virginia from exposure to secondhand smoke. So in '09, I was able to get the bill passed in both the Senate and the House, and Governor Kaine signed it into law. And so as a pediatrician, that was something I'd always, you know, advocated for children's health. And so I think it really made a big difference in Virginia. And it was just something that you have an idea, you turn into policy, and then you make it law. So that was very meaningful, I think, to me and to the Commonwealth.
And Ralph describes it well. He did such a good job on that bill. And it's rare to ask a freshman to carry a hard bill. But I knew as governor that this freshman, as a pediatrician, could carry a hard bill and get it over. So that was great. Accomplishments. So I guess that's sort of a Rorschach. You know, you just ought to say what comes to your mind. And I have been in elected office now for 24 years, local for 8, state for 8, and now essentially federal office for 8, either as a national party chair or as a senator. But the thing that I'm probably the proudest of in terms of an accomplishment is I'm just proud of the arc that Virginia's been on, and that Ann and I, my wife Ann and I, played our little part in it. So when I moved to Virginia, I'm from Kansas City. My wife's a Virginian. We live in Virginia because she's a better negotiator. We got married in 1984, moved to Richmond. I knew one person. The state was frankly socially pretty exclusive. If you weren't from here, you know, not much was expected of you. Economically, it was kind of sluggish. Politically, not competitive. Very, very red state. And over time, I was a civil rights lawyer for 17 years working in Richmond, and Ann was a legal aid lawyer. And then as I got into politics, she became a juvenile court judge and eventually first lady. We really kind of have a family project, and the project is we wanted to make Virginia more socially welcoming, more economically dynamic, more politically competitive, more focused on education. And we've played our own little part with a whole lot of other people like Ralph and his wife Pam and a lot of people. And I think Virginia is the best political turnaround project in the United States. Even when I ran for lieutenant governor, the first time I ran for statewide office in 2001 after 8 years in local office, every statewide official in Virginia was Republican. We'd been red in presidential years essentially since 1948 with one quirky 1964 counterexample. Democrats had been in a complete wilderness. And 17 years later, every statewide official in Virginia is Democrat. We've gone blue 3 presidential elections in a row. We've won the last 10 statewide races, including Ralph's big victory in November. And I say that, and it sounds partisan. My political hero is my wife's dad, who was a Republican governor, who integrated Virginia's public schools when Democrats had maintained segregation for 16 years after Brown v. Board. So neither party has a monopoly on vice or virtue, especially over time it can switch around. But the Virginia I moved to 33 years ago was not progressive. And the Virginia I live in today is a lot more progressive, although there's nothing we're doing that we can't do better. So because we moved to Virginia partly to hope we could do that, I think the thing I'm just proudest of is just watching the arc that Virginia has been on and feeling good that my wife and I could play a little part in it.
Another interesting aspect that I want to highlight about the audience here and students here today is that we all come from diverse backgrounds. Yeah. For instance, Andreas here is from Copenhagen in Denmark, goes to NYU's Shanghai campus. I'm from Pakistan, go to NYU's Abu Dhabi campus. So keeping that global mobility in mind, the American society today is reflective of what the experiences that we bring into this room. Keeping that in mind, since both of you have run very progressive campaigns that engage people from diverse backgrounds, what are some of the cultural tools that you've utilized to engage Virginians from different social, cultural, and economic spheres of society? And Senator Kaine, I would love to start with you since I know that you play the harmonica and speak Spanish that I'm a fan of.
Yes. Well, and can I say, and I've got a Tisch graduate. My daughter, Anella, who's the youngest of my three, graduated from Tisch last May, and she is a working actress in New York City, which means she works at the Tribeca Grill as a waitress. She works at the front desk of the Atlantic Theater Studio, an off-Broadway theater studio, but then she auditions all the time and has had some great success in her first year, modest, but for a first year, has had some wonderful success and loved NYU. So you've asked about culture, and it's something that we're really proud of in Richmond, so, and in Virginia generally, what cultural tools enable you to connect. So, look, I'm a white Irish Catholic guy. So how do I connect with people, and not even from Virginia either, so we knew one person when I moved here, how to connect with people. All of us connect ultimately the same way. Be authentically who you are. Don't be somebody else. People respond to authenticity and sincerity and genuineness. So that's the first thing you have to do to connect, and that's the rule for all. In Virginia, what I've tried to do is remember, I come from a pretty narrow little crowd. I grew up in a place where everybody was Catholic, and like if it was an Italian Catholic, that would be diversity. I mean, we were all Irish Catholic. I moved to Virginia. Catholic population is really tiny when I moved here. So my civil rights work, my work in local politics in a city that's majority African American, started my early support for President Obama when he was running. That started to build ties in the African American community. My Spanish fluency from my time living in Honduras, which was sort of accidental. I moved to Virginia fluent in Spanish, but didn't speak Spanish for about 15 years. The only Spanish I would speak is I would get called occasionally from a court to translate for when a translator canceled, but I wasn't in Richmond running across Latinos. But about the time I got elected mayor, I'd lived in Richmond now 15 years. The growth of the Latino population in Virginia has started to be one where, without really trying to, I was speaking Spanish more. And by the time I was running for governor, I was running ads on TV in Spanish. And now in the Senate, I speak Spanish every day, again, without trying to. There's just enough Latinos who work in the Capitol, Telemundo and Univision. They want to ask you about the issue of the day, North Korea, immigration reform, minimum wage, Syria. Only 3 senators are fluent in Spanish and can talk about the issue in the language that 45 million Americans want to hear their news in. But then the other thing culturally, I'll just say is, and this is a good connector, and I have a theory about why. I'm a big music fanatic. And so I am an enthusiastic but amateur harmonica player and singer. And for years I sang in the gospel choir in my church. And about the time I ran for governor, I realized, because frankly, my wife pushed me to do it. She's a real good dancer, bluegrass dancer. So she once got up on stage when I was running for governor and danced and said, "You got to make a fool out of yourself now." So I said, "Well, give me a harmonica." And so that just started this thing of playing with bands, and I play with bands now all the time. And people are like, "Well, he's no pro, but he's no stiff." They kind of like to see you just having fun. And I can play any kind of music by ear. I can't read music, but I can tell me what key it's in. I can play. And it's a connector. And I don't know, anybody here in arts, in an arts field? So music is a connector. You can't play it if you can't listen. You got to listen. You got to listen to what others are doing. Listening's a lost art in life. It's a group project. You have to listen and adjust to somebody else. You have to be able to improvise and be spontaneous. Somebody tells me they're playing a song. Well, I don't know I've never heard of that song, but if it's in D, okay, I can figure it out and play it with you. So there's improvise. So listening, communicating, teamwork, improvising. Music is much more than just music. It is a kind of communication, and it does reach across cultures. You might, if you can read music, you might not be able to speak German. You might. What would your language be originally? Urdu. You might. But there are folks who speak Urdu who can read a musical notation, or folks who can read Danish who can read a musical notation in English. So there's a commonality to music, even a different kind of music that you don't know. There's a commonality to music that can make people, wow, that sounds kind of interesting. I want to know more. So anyway, I've kind of rambled, but you can tell that the music part of it is a really cool connector.
So do you have your harmonica with you?
I have 8 of them in the car parked downstairs. So
Just a couple comments in regard to how we reach out to different cultures. And I think Tim hit the nail on the head when he mentioned listening. And if you talk to people, and I think if you're secure in your thoughts and beliefs and open-minded to others and ask other folks what's important to them, then that's the way we connect with people. And a couple of points I was going to make. I grew up on a farm, on a small farm in a very rural part of Virginia, a very conservative area. And so I remember a lot of issues with guns and social issues. And the first thing that really opened my eyes to diversity and really knowing that we were all in this together, in 1971, and Tim mentioned that his father-in-law was governor that helped with desegregation of schools. They desegregated schools where I was growing up, and there was this massive white flight. 2 private schools started, and my parents chose to keep my brother and me in public schools. And that was probably the best thing that they could have ever done because, I learned that we're all in this together. And even as we have, we ran this campaign in 2017, we spent a lot of time on our college campuses. And by the way, I know we always like to talk about our children. Pam and I have 2 children, a 29-year-old who's a neurosurgery resident and a 27-year-old female who's a graphics design artist. But one of the things that I learned when we went into the college campuses was the importance of diversity and inclusivity. And there are a lot of things that are important, I think, to people from all countries, things like jobs, things like access to education for your children, things like access to affordable and quality health care, living in communities where there are not guns on every street corner. But the most important thing that I heard and why I'm so encouraged about our future, and especially that people like you are willing to get involved, is that we have to have our doors open, our lights have to be on. We need to welcome people. And we welcome people whether it's their sexual orientation or the color of their skin or the religion that they practice or the country that they come from. That's the way, it's diversity that made this country what it is. And we need to continue to promote that. And I think that message resonates with folks. And it helps people when they come from other countries to know that they're welcome here. And, we had the travel ban, which was back in 2017, which was embarrassing for this country. It was embarrassing for Tim and me. We went to Dulles Airport. We tried to do everything we can to make people comfortable. And then we have things like people that want to ban sanctuary cities, and a lot of it is just fear-mongering. And that needs to stop. And it's a large difference, quite frankly, about the 2 parties right now. And I think our party, and I'm proud of it, we welcome people. The party that we deal with, and we try to get along with folks on both sides of the aisle, but the fear-mongering and making people feel that they're not welcome here, that has no place in this country.
Thank you very much. So for the next question, I want to touch on something both of you mentioned, which is this divide between the Republicans and the Democrats. So if we look at the 2016 election, one thing that was revealed was that there's a big divide between the urban areas and the rural areas. So the map I'll show over here is Virginia in 2016. And the next map is the recent election, December 2017, your election, Governor. And what it really reveals here is that you have a big divide between the major cities within Virginia and the rural areas. So what I'm curious about is, how are you trying to bridge this gap between rural areas and the cities within Virginia?
I'll start making a very quick comment, and then I'll turn it over to Tim. But as I said, I am from rural Virginia, so I know some of the issues. And I think what we need to do as Democrats, and certainly what I've tried to do, is if you think about running a business, and you all probably haven't got to the stage where you want to run a business, but when you're a business person, you talk about what I want to do, and then how I'm going to do it, and then why. A good business person flips that and starts talking about the why. And I think that that's what we need to do as we move forward and go out into rural areas and talk about why it's important for you to have a job that you can support yourself and your family with, why it's important that your children have access to a world-class education, why it's important that we all have access to affordable and quality health care, why we live in environments where the air and water are clean. And then after we get their attention and let them know that we're listening and we're there to help them, then we can talk about what we want to do and how we do it. But I really think if we kind of refocus our message into more of the why than the what's and the hows, I think that will resonate with people in both rural and metropolitan areas.
That's great. Can you put the first one up, the 2016 one again? Because for those of you who don't know Virginia, this is interesting. So the 2016 slide. So this was Hillary and I running in Virginia. The blue counties, Hillary and I won. The red counties, we lost. So how do you think we did in Virginia? We won by 5.5%. Yeah, we won big. That's a big win for a Democrat. What that shows you is, see, where we won, which is maybe 20 out of the 134 cities and counties, big population. And all those red areas we lost are small population, and it's the way you posted, Andreas. It's rural Virginia. So we actually, for a Democrat to win by in a presidential race by 5.5, that was significantly more than President Obama won 4 years before. But you can see we're just winning in pieces of the state, and there's a lot of state we aren't. So I like what Ralph said about why, and I'll build on that and say one more thing. I think sometimes we make a mistake by not talking about a different why, which is, why do I do this? People are really skeptical about people in politics. Like, are you in it for your resume? Are you in it because you're on a power trip? Are you in it because you think you'll get some money out of it or something? They're really skeptical about why we do this. And sometimes we can make a mistake, and I say I think this is a little more of a Democratic fault sometimes. We'll give people the laundry list. Here's our 10 policy positions. Yeah, but why are you doing this? Why are you doing this? What motivates you? And so I always encourage, I talk a lot about this year that I spent in Honduras and my civil rights work as a motivator that led me into politics. I never thought I'd be in politics, but my year in Honduras and the civil rights work kind of led me in, because I learned from these great missionaries in Honduras and the really very, very poor people I worked with what need there is out there and how much work there is to be done and how much one person can do. And then that motivates me. And I always encourage people to share motivation. I hope some of you are going to run for office one day. Share your motivation. For some, in my case, it was this missionary experience, which is sort of a faith. I mean, I'm on a faith journey, and that's kind of really why I do what I do. For some, it's an experience. I was treated this way when I was a kid, and I don't want anybody to have to go through this. So there's all kinds of whys, but don't be bashful about sharing the why. Because if people know why you are doing it, then maybe there'll be an issue that'll come up a year from now that nobody's even talking about. But if they kind of know the way you tick and why you're doing what you're doing, then they have a basis for sort of understanding how you'll deal with the big problem down the road that nobody's talking about. So that's one thing. Second thing is presence. Hillary and I won Virginia by 5.5. And we went to a lot of those places, and we did a lot of events there, and we didn't go to the places that we lost. And there's a danger there. Because if we had gone to some of the places that we lost, we still would have lost. But we would have got 35% of the vote instead of 25% of the vote. And that's really important. There's a instinctive reaction of, well, why would I go there? I'm going to lose. Well, you go there because they're entitled to see you. And if you go, you won't lose as bad as you thought you would. And if you think about it, Ralph, this didn't occur to me until way later. There's some counties in Southwest Virginia where I got 27% of the vote. But I would argue that those 27 might be the most loyal supporters I have. Because the person that's voting for you, when every house around them has the yard sign from the other candidate, they may be the most loyal supporter you have. So they're entitled to a little bit of attention for their loyalty in a more hostile place. So this is an easier thing to do if you're running for Senate in one state than if you're running in a presidential campaign in 50. You can go to every part of a state, and that's why Ralph's map looked a lot better than ours. He was running for governor of Virginia, and Ralph has a unique ability for a variety of reasons to reach out. But part of the reasons he was able to spend a lot of time in the parts of Virginia, even the pieces that he lost, whereas we in a 50-state race are really going to the places where we think we run. But I learned a lesson from that, and I'm definitely spending a lot of time now, especially in 2017 in the early part of this year. I'm on the ballot later this year. I'm spending a lot of time in the redder parts of the state to show folks. I have a friend, Joe Manchin, in the Senate, who says they don't care how much you know until they know how much you care. And you can have the right policy, but if you're not there yourself, they don't really believe you believe it. If you're there yourself, then they start to say, okay, maybe this person really believes it.
So my next question is about the rise of nationalism in the country and this sense of nostalgia about what it means to be and look American. Given that, what concrete steps have you already taken or are hoping to take in upcoming elections about countering such narratives without alienating the people who uphold such ideals?
Well, maybe I'll start. We kind of alternate on who takes the lead. We're friends here, and we've done this a few times together. I think the 2016 race was, and some of our trends now are more about demographics than they are about economics. That there's demographic concerns. And in fact, if you look at the economic issues are really important, but if you look at our history, when we advance on the equality front toward our North Star, we usually retract a little bit. We don't go all the way back, but we bloodily fought the Civil War and rewrote the Constitution to empower people and bar discrimination based on race. But then the Reconstruction period barely lasted at all, and then it was 40 years of Jim Crow. And then when we passed the Civil Rights Act in the 1960s, LBJ said, now we should all vote for this, but make no mistake, if the Democrats vote for this, we're going to lose the South for the next 50 years. We should still do it. And he was right. So when you advance on the equality front, you usually have a you go back. President Obama, 8 years, it was African-American president, protection for dreamers, Latino on the Supreme Court, women can serve in any MOS of the military, complete LGBT equality, and we're going to have a woman president too. Isn't that fantastic? And a lot of people are like, hold on a second. I mean, this is just the change is too much. So then there's a backlash. But one thing we should not do is we can't take our foot off the pedal on the pro-equality thing. I completely agree with Ralph. That's who the party is. That's who the country is. That's who our North Star is. So I've heard some say, well, the Democrats are too into identity politics. Democrats are too into political correctness. And I've said, no, we're into equality. Because Jefferson said it was the first of the self-evident truths, and Lincoln said it was the proposition on which the nation was built. So we're not going to back off on that at all. But you have to continue your outreach to everybody in every way you can. But that means not forsaking the red parts of the state, not forsaking places where the pace of change makes them nervous. Because for some people, the pace of change even the pace of demographic change has coincided with the pace of, their economies maybe have been getting weaker. So, and if you live in a stressed area, you will point the finger at somebody. You might be wrong, but that's a human dynamic. Last thing I'll say is, I always talk about immigration this way. This is the speech I make about immigration all over Virginia, red or blue, urban, metropolitan, or rural. I say this, I'm 60 years old. When I was born, Virginia was 1 out of 100 foreign born, and we were 38th out of 50 in per capita income. So we were poor. We were a poor state, bottom quarter. Today, Virginia's 1 out of 9 born in another country, 1 out of 100 to 1 out of 9, and we're 12th in the nation in per capita income. We're top quarter. We've gone from bottom quarter to top quarter, while we've been going from super non-immigrant to very, very much an internationalized community. So let's begin. You can't tell me that immigration's been bad for Virginia. Immigration's been good. Why has it been good? We're living in a global economy. You want to have a port? We do. You want to have an international airport? You do. But people are connection points too. And people who've come from elsewhere know people elsewhere, and they know how to find customers elsewhere, and they bring ideas from elsewhere. So our internationalizing has been good for our economy. And I like to lead with that before I get into Statue of Liberty and fairness, and this is who we are. And it's been great for our economy. And if you talk about it that way, you can open up a conversation sometimes with people, and they're, oh wow, I hadn't thought of it that way.
Yeah. The way I like to open up some of our discussions when we talk about who we are as a country, and in our case, who we are as a Commonwealth of Virginia, but I just ask people to look around the room. And you can look at this room. It's a beautiful sight. And there are people from all different countries and I suspect different religions. And again, that is, it's you that makes us who we are. And so one of the things that I've been so encouraged by, again, during this past year, and again, Tim and Ann have 3 children, Pam and I have 2, is that the young people like you get it. You're part of the evolution of our society and the evolution of our country, and I just encourage you all to be involved. And let me just end, and I'm going to take a little bit different twist. One of the most difficult discussions or challenges that we have in this country right now is the proliferation of guns. And if you want to talk about a difficult discussion in Virginia to have, if you mention the word gun, this wall comes down, or kin. And so the way I like to approach it is say, let's see if we can agree on something regarding guns, and let's agree that perhaps that we think that people that have a firearm should be to use it safely. Just like you get behind the wheel of an automobile. And then once we can agree on something, then how can we come up with responsible gun laws? And I'll just give you a quick example of what we're up against and why we need your help. And this is a whole, maybe a different theme that perhaps leaders such as Tim and I have failed in certain areas. And this is why we need you as young people to come in and really help fix some of these issues. But, when we have close to 1,000 deaths in Virginia each year from gun violence, it's just something that I don't think we can sit by as a society and say we're not going to jump in here and do something. And I actually had the opportunity to be in Washington a few weeks ago for the march, and I talked with some of the children and some of the families and even some of the doctors from Parkland. And if those aren't powerful stories, if they don't get your attention and make you realize that we're all in this together, then I don't know what else does. And I just would take this opportunity to commend Tim. Tim was the governor when we had our tragedy at Virginia Tech in 2007 and lost 32 precious lives. And it's just, Tim, it's something that you and I feel so strongly about that. And this is, again, why we need your help as we move forward. We just can't continue to have these horrific tragedies occur in this country.
Thank you. So we actually do want to talk about gun legislation, if you don't mind. So Virginia, as you said, is a very difficult state for that, in part because you're home to the NRA, and you're also home to several militias, such as the Free Percenters and the Pennsylvania Lightfoot Militia. And so in March this year, the House in Virginia tried to pass 70 gun-related bills, and only one of them passed. So it seems like there's a lot of personal feelings involved in these discussions, more than other places in the country, perhaps. What are some of the ways you're trying to improve gun legislation under these circumstances, both in Virginia and across the country?
Let me just start, and then Tim has a tremendous amount of experience with this, but just a couple of things. I told you I grew up in rural Virginia, so I grew up around folks that hunted and fished, and I believe in the Second Amendment. But then I went off and went through medical school, and I served in the United States Army, and I took care of wounded soldiers during Desert Storm. And that was very eye-opening. I saw what weapons of war do to individuals personally. I've also, as a child neurologist, unfortunately have taken care of toddlers who will pick up a loaded firearm on the bedside table. And you know the rest of that story. We've had just case after case of domestic violence where guns are involved. And so I have always been an advocate for responsible gun ownership. And to your question, Andreas, we introduced a number of pieces of legislation that I thought were common sense. Things like banning bump stocks. I mean, we don't need some automatic weapons on our streets. We wanted to promote universal background checks. We wanted to outlaw weapons of war, 1 gun a month. I could go on. And the very first morning, the first day that I was governor, they defeated all of them without any discussion. And that's what we're up against. But I am convinced, and again, I have seen so many tragedies, I'm convinced that because of you and because of people like from Parkland that have said, and you've heard this said before, I know that when people say our thoughts and prayers are with you, people said, that's very kind of you, but it's time to take action. And people are standing up and saying enough is enough. And we've got to keep this energy. We've got to keep this enthusiasm going. And I don't want to be political. I know this is probably a nonpartisan group, but I try as hard as I can to sit down with people and use logic and try to educate folks as to why we need responsible gun ownership. And they're just sometimes you can't change people's minds. And so if you can't change people's minds, it's up to you to change their seats. And you do that at the ballot box, and you do it by registering to vote and make sure that people are part of the process. And again, I just am glad that you all are here tonight and showing interest. And this is about your future. I can't speak for Senator Kaine, but I'm not getting any younger, but they getting ready to put me out in the pasture. But it's time for you all to step up and maybe fix some of the things that we haven't been able to take care of as your leaders.
The gun issue, I got a lot of scar tissue on this one in a very different way than Ralph, who's a doctor treating combat wounded troops or kids, who came into his medical practice. I was the city councilman mayor of Richmond. We had the second highest homicide rate in the United States when I got elected. And I went to a lot of crime scenes, a lot of funerals, a lot of wakes, a lot of homicide victim family support group meetings in church basements. Very painful process, but over the course of 4 terms, about 8 years, we brought our homicide and aggravated assault rate way down. So there was pain, but we learned there are steps you can take to make us safer. And some of the steps, not all of them, but some of them do involve gun rules. Then I was governor, and there's shooting happened at Virginia Tech, absolutely worst day of my life, and it's stretched on now for 11 years. I'm very close to many of the 32 families who lost a child, lost a parent, lost a spouse. Amazing group of 32 people who were killed. I put a panel together within 2 days after the shooting to look at everything and make recommendations. My attorney general said, if you put a panel together, that'll just give somebody a blueprint to file a lawsuit against us. I said, I don't care about the lawsuit. I owe it to these families to try to learn everything we can and then try to reduce the chance of it happening again. And again, the painful experience taught us the same thing. We can learn. We can get better. There was a problem with our background check system, and I was able to fix part of it and then tried to go to my legislature and get them to fix the rest. They wouldn't do it because the NRA said no. But at least in both instances, remember, gun violence isn't about the mass shootings. It's also about the random street corner shootings that were hurting people in Richmond, or kids picking up guns at the bedside table and hurting themselves. And the ones in Richmond, the street corner shooting, they weren't on A1 and they weren't on the evening news, but there's much a tragedy as a mass shooting. But in each instance, the street corner, tough, everyday crime, domestic violence, and the mass shooting, same lesson. There are things you can do that will make people safer, and some of them involve reasonable rules on guns. And once you know that, then you have the obligation to do it. Well, I came to the Senate. I was sworn in 1 month after the shooting at Newtown. So I've already had these experiences, and now I'm in the Senate, and we're having a debate. First meaningful debate I'm really in the Senate is whether as a nation we can do something after the shooting of all these little kids. And again, we're on the floor of the Senate. It's April of 2013. All the Newtown families are sitting in the gallery around us, many of them with Virginia Tech families sitting next to them holding their hands to support them. We had a bill to make universal background checks the law of the country, and we fell a couple of votes short. And it was, that was a really bad day. You don't want to fail on something important, especially when all these families are watching you. And the only reason that we're falling short is I have colleagues. I don't question their bad faith, but they're afraid. They're afraid. They're afraid of the NRA. They're afraid of the NRA doing in their races what they've done in mine, come in and spent millions of dollars against me. Give me an F, campaign against me. And I look at my colleagues in the eye and say, look, they've done that, but even in their home state, they've never been able to beat me in Virginia. I'm not undefeated anymore, but at least I've never lost the popular vote or lost the Virginia vote. But when I tell my colleagues, don't worry so much about the NRA, they say, yeah, but if I don't speak up, then maybe they won't spend the $2 million against me. They'll spend it in some other state. So what we need to do, and what Ralph said is right about young people, on the issues where adults fail, it's often in the course of our history that young people are the ones that are the icebreaker, When Barbara Johns, 16-year-old high school sophomore in Farmville, Virginia, in 1951, led a walkout of her segregated high school and said, our school sucks compared to the white kids' school. And then they walked out and they called the civil rights lawyer and said, hey, represent us. And that case became part of Brown versus Board that changed the whole fabric of American life. And it was a high school sophomore that did it. Or when the kids in Birmingham in May of 1963, the high schoolers, Dr. King's trying to integrate Birmingham public accommodations. And no matter how many adults got arrested, Dr. King was arrested, letter from the Birmingham jail, but no matter how many adults got arrested, the Birmingham leaders wouldn't change. But the high school kids are, let us march, let us march. And Dr. King was, no, I don't want you to march, because he was a dad. He didn't want kids getting arrested. He didn't want them facing off against guard dogs and fire hoses. But eventually the kids said to him, isn't this more about us than it is about you? And he was at least a spiritually in touch enough person to have an epiphany like, hey, wait, you're right, I'm wrong. Yeah, of course it is, so you should march. And the kids marching, and the pictures of the kids marching, and the pictures of the kids being set upon by the police changed the dynamic. And I just let me make this last point about this, because it's really important, because it's important about what you can do. Why did the kids marching and their pictures on the front page of the paper in May of 1963, why did it change the national mood about segregation? Was it that adults didn't know there was segregation? They knew there was segregation. Was it they didn't know how bad it was? They knew how bad it was. It's when they saw their kids being more courageous than they were, it made them decide, I guess we have to act like adults. I guess leaders have to act like leaders. Sometimes the power of a young person is you're holding a mirror up in the face of the adults and you're showing them that they've fallen short. And that can be incredibly powerful in inspiring them and inspiring us to be better than we've been. And that's why on this issue with the Parkland students, and when I say Parkland, it's not automatic that it goes viral and every high school in the country decides to in solidarity walk out with them. That's really so powerful. That's so powerful. You are holding a mirror up in our faces. You are doing what that 11-year-old kid from Virginia, Naomi Wadler, who spoke before 800,000 people after she led a walkout at her school. You're basically just saying to us, hey, adults, act like adults. You say kids matter. You say your family values people. But your vote suggests that you're just going along with a contributor and your kids don't matter to you. Your witness is so powerful on this. And if we get over the hump, it's going to be because of you.
Okay, so we'll have one more question up here. Warda will ask that, and then we'll turn it over to Q&A.
So as students interested in policy and politics, campaign finance is one thing that often keeps coming up. And it is also one of the most heated topics in American politics right now. Could you both speak more about the impact that big money has on policy decisions after an election, and also reflect back on a time when your personal values were in conflict with another group, individual, or corporation that financially supported your race?
Yes. A great question, and I think Tim will have some comments, but we vote our conscience and what's in the best interest of the voters, and not by who sponsored our campaign. Saying that, we have to, as a society, address campaign finance reform because it has gotten out of hand. And just so you know, in Virginia, it's like the Wild West. There are no limitations. So an individual or corporation can give you as much money as they feel comfortable. And the problem, the challenge, is that in order to run a campaign, in order to get your message out, especially to get on the TV networks, and I will say that I am hopeful that, we used in 2017, we used social media a lot, and it's a lot less expensive, but you still, at the end of the day, need to get on TV. But our campaign, which I'm embarrassed to tell you, in Virginia in 2017 cost $36 million. Now, $36 million, think about what that could be used for, whether it could be used for education or health care, and so I regret that. With that being said, I have tried as hard as I can not to let, whether it's a corporation or an individual, not to let that influence how I govern and how I vote. And do, again, just I always say, what not what's in the best interest of a corporation, but what's in the best interest of my constituents that I serve. And so that's what I've tried to do. Does money influence politics? I suspect that you could make that argument, but we try just as hard as we can to not let that happen. But again, this is something that our generation of leadership, I suspect, has failed you on, and I hope it's something that you all would take seriously. And not only campaign finance reform, but also redistricting, and that occurs in 2021. And we need nonpartisan redistricting so that these lines can be drawn fairly. I remind people all the time that you should be choosing your representatives rather than me choosing my voters. And so a lot of issues out there, but campaign finance reform is certainly something we need to address.
And I'll just jump in and say, I mean, this is a kind of a sad one that has become partisan and it shouldn't. Democrats support virtually every campaign finance proposal that anybody puts on the table. Disclosure of donors, limitation of corporate money. The McCain-Feingold bill actually was a bipartisan bill passed to do some limitation on campaign finance a number of years ago. The Supreme Court struck part of it down, and Citizens United. But now when Democrats, when we introduce campaign finance bills, we can't get a Republican co-sponsor, even like to disclose donors. So then it puts us in this funny position. We want to reform the system. The other side won't join us. So do we tie our hands and not raise funds under existing rules while they do it? That's a tough one. Sort of, do you unilaterally disarm? I will say this. I work really hard, and look, none of us are perfect, and we have subconscious biases so often it's less conscious than subconscious. But I work really hard to never let a donation affect my view of things. And I was kind of perversely proud. Virginia's the only governorship you're governor for one term. 4 years, you can't run for re-election. So I finished being governor in 2010. I ran for Senate in 2012. 3 of my top 5 donors when I was governor wouldn't give me a penny when I ran for the Senate. And they had given me a ton. Why wouldn't they give me a penny? Because I'd done stuff as governor that they didn't like. And I'm like, if you've helped me, I'm going to listen to you, but you're not entitled to have me do something that I don't think is right. And so in one sense, I was kind of disappointed, like, well, you helped me a lot. I wish you'd help me again. But then I was also kind of perversely proud that 3 of my biggest 5 donors would not give me 1 penny when I ran for the Senate. And it's like, because I did what I thought was right, and they didn't agree with me. The one way it affects policy, if you assume that fundraising has no effect on policy, it still has way too much effect on politics because you got to spend so much time doing it. People wonder why up here there's gridlock and nothing gets done, and how come there more legislation isn't passed? If you're here 4 days a week and you're spending 30% of your time, and that may be on the low end, fundraising, if you waved a magic wand and you weren't doing that, and you were spending that 30% of your time meeting with your colleagues and doing some brainstorming and really having long committee meetings, you could get a lot more work done. Yeah. But these poor House members, especially, who are running on 2-year terms, and then they win, and then they immediately start having to fundraising for the next one, the sheer amount of fundraising time that even if you assume it has no effect on the outcome of anybody's vote, it still has a dramatic effect on our politics because it takes the time away from the job of being a legislator or being a governor.
Great, thank you very much. So before we begin the Q&A, just a few rules. First of all, so there's going to be a microphone passed around either, I think, on both sides, perfect. When you get the microphone, please stand up and say your name and return the microphone as soon as you have asked your question. Only 1 question per person. We only have about 15 minutes for Q&A, so keep it brief and respect everyone's time. Thank you very much. So if anyone has questions, raise your hand. There's one there.
And Warda, Andreas, good questions. I mean, let's give them some credit. They did some good questions.
So I know in recent years, especially on the Democratic side, major campaigns have been running on the idea of uniting the American people. When you think of President Obama having "Yes, we can" and hope and better together, stronger together, things like that. And I know for me, who I want to do what you all do one day, I tend to have a lot of more faith in what government and politicians can do. But as you've both touched on, it seems that the majority of the American people do not. So as government officials and people who quite literally dedicate your lives to helping others, How do you approach the subject of people not having faith in the work that you do? And in the future, how can you assure people like us who are upcoming voters that are entering into the lives of adulthood in the country? How do you reassure people that government isn't bad and that it's here for us, not against us?
Well, I think we have to. There's nothing I'm going to say that's going to assure you, and you shouldn't be assured by anything that I say. I mean, I think you have to hold us to the action test. Now, sometimes action can be. I mean, I'll give you an example. Here's a recent one that we've really grappled with in the Senate. We want to get a solution for our Dreamers, and every Democrat in both houses supports permanent path to citizenship for Dreamers. And I voted for it right when I came into the Senate in June of 2013. It was a drafter of a bipartisan compromise recently that we came very close, but we couldn't quite get there. So I'm not only talking about it, but I'm drafting bills and I'm voting on them, but we've still fallen short. So you ought to test us based on, are we acting? And if we're not getting over the hump, don't blame the folks who are voting the right way. Focus on the folks who aren't. But I think you should test us on the action side, not on the words. Check our voting record. Check check your ability to get some results. If not on everything, if not on every issue, show me how you've gotten a result working across the aisle. I think that's important. And I'll just throw one other. Here's something that y'all could do that could be a good encourager for anybody in office. If you interact with your local member of Congress, governor, legislator, and you say, hey, tell me something good that you're working with somebody on the other side of the aisle. Because if politicians heard that all the time from people, then they would be a little more motivated to build the bridges necessarily to make some things happen. But if what they hear from their voters are, hey, we're right, kick the other side around all the time, then they'll do that. So I think you can help us, you meaning the entire electorate, if you pressure your elected officials, tell me something good that you're working on with somebody on the other side of the aisle. If we heard that a lot, we'd do more of it.
And I think what Tim said, actions speak a lot louder than words. And I would look for folks out there that, one, tell the truth. What we're seeing right now is just embarrassing for this country and embarrassing from, I think, our leaders. I think we need people with a moral compass. We need people that I think are civil, that know how to deal with other folks. And I'll tell you, and just the most difficult thing for me, and I've been doing this now, believe it or not, for 10 years. I was in the Senate for 6 years and then lieutenant governor as 4. And I would encourage you, if you want to get into public service, which I really hope that you all do, is to, as I said maybe earlier in my comments, to be strong in what you believe in and secure, and then be open-minded to what other folks' beliefs are. But don't worry so much about what people say about you. And what has been very difficult for me, and I do what I do because I want to help others. That's why I was a physician. That's why I served in the Army. But the social media right now, people are vicious. And so they say things about me. They say things about my family. It's like, you don't even know me. And, how can you do that? And it sometimes will take the wind out of yourselves. But so for those of you want to do this, don't let that bother you. You have to kind of get thick skin and, again, be secure in what you want to do and know why, as Tim said earlier, why you want to do it and just move forward and do it for the right reasons. And one of the things that I most admire, and I say this to his face and to other folks too, but there are a lot of people that go into politics for the wrong reason. And Tim mentioned some of those with their resume or whatever. And then there are a lot that once they get there, they forget why they're there. And that is to serve their constituents and to help others that are perhaps less fortunate than them. So it can be and it should be very rewarding. And again, don't be discouraged by some of what you're seeing now. We need more young people that have a moral compass, that are civil, that know how to tell the truth in leadership positions. So that's the direction that this country needs to go in.
Hi, Governor. Hi, Senator. I was just wondering, there are some issues that used to be bipartisan, like admitting refugees into the country. And I'm just wondering, like you were speaking about rural Virginia, people in rural Virginia earlier, how do you convince these people in your constituency and the rest of the country that this issue does matter to them as well, that these people do deserve to come here into the country and they're not here to be terrorists or commit attacks on our land? So.
Yeah, that's a challenging one. Although I'll tell you, when President Trump announced the Muslim travel ban, it was a Friday night, in January after 5 o'clock. If they're going to announce bad news, they're going to do it Friday after 5 because they think people have gone home from the weekend and won't notice. So they announced this travel ban. It just so happened I was in Appalachia that weekend, so this would have been in the red zones up here. And darned if I didn't have people coming up to me. It was in Blacksburg, Ralph. I had people coming up, hey, wait, we have a Syrian family that's coming into the Roanoke airport next week. Our church helped settle a refugee family last year, and we're going to help settle. So what's going to happen to our family? And so we ended up working with families out there. So in church congregations, what this president has done on this refugee issue, it is not in accord with any of our values, none. And that's why the spontaneous protests all across the country were so powerful. Ralph and I went to Dulles Airport. There's a lot of international flights, right? So there's an international arrival zone. And I heard there's protesters at Dulles. I want to see protesters. You get protesters, you get a picture in your mind's eye. So I go see these protesters, and they're family men. They're holding signs up, Virginia's for lovers. Welcome to our neighborhood. My favorite was this family that had a big picture of Mr. Rogers, welcome to our neighborhood, And so it was all these regular people, and I was so excited. Ralph, I don't know if you've heard me say this. This was on a Monday, and we voted on Monday in the Senate. So I just saw this, and then I raced down to the floor and said, you folks, you won't believe these protesters at Dulles. You won't believe how great they are. My friend Joe Donnelly from Indiana said, Tim, same thing happened in Indiana. We don't even have any international flights. Everybody went to the airport, and they were hugging people from Chicago and Columbus, like, welcome to the Hoosier State. We're not anti-Muslim. We love you, But the spontaneity of people turning out, there is, are there hard anti-immigrant people? Yeah, there are. And all you got to do is read some social media and, dip your toe into the hate stream, And I don't do it a lot, but I do it a couple times a week because you got to know what's out there. You got to dip your toe into the hate stream and know what's out there. But the goodwill out there around trying to help people out who are in a jam is still very, very present. We just don't have somebody in the Oval Office who acknowledges it. He says this Syrian missile strike was because he cares about Syrian humanitarian situation. We only let 11 Syrian refugees into the country since he's been president, while millions have been going into other countries. If he cared about the humanitarian crisis, we would have had a different refugee policy. So you can't tell me that a missile strike means you care when you wouldn't take refugees in here. But I think that our population is better on this and understands it. I really believe that they are.
We have time for one more question, just to make sure that we stick with your schedule as well. Thank you.
All right. So my name is Joaquin, and I'd really like to gauge Senator Kaine's thoughts on this question, as I know.
Darn, I thought he was going to get the last one.
But yeah, I know the senator is a former chair of the DNC and also a fellow Missourian. But I'm closely following Senator McCaskill's race for a third term. And as we know, McCaskill is among a group of moderate Democrats seeking re-election in states that Trump won by large margins. But in an age when young voters are more diverse and progressively liberal than generations before, it makes me wonder whether these Democrats could be seen as detriments to the party's future. Put more clearly, how, if possible, can moderates of the party continue to appeal, fight for, and mobilize a young progressive-leaning base that could see party fractures in the 2016 election and the ambiguous fate of
and
DACA.
I would say both Ralph and I are probably kind of in the moderate camp, and he's just done it in Virginia, and I need to do it this year, so maybe we can each take a crack at that if that's okay, Joaquin. I would say this: I think before you get to positioning, I think is that person true to themselves? Are they true to themselves? And I think that's just so important. Claire McCaskill is true to herself. I mean, she is a, former prosecutor who kind of comes at it like a former prosecutor. She's dogged and determined and no nonsense. And people who know Claire, there's plenty of people who've never voted for Claire, but they kind of respect her because she kind of is who she is. And I think that's the real key issue. How about moderates and progressives? Here's an issue about the Democratic Party that's good and that's bad. We believe in the Big Tent. So we want a room that looks like everybody. We want you to walk into a Democratic meeting and see somebody who looks like you, age, race, gender, sexual orientation, national origin, religion, rich, poor. We want you to see somebody who looks like you. That's what we want. But you don't get that and then get everybody on the same page about every issue. If you really want the diversity I just described, you're going to have super progressives and blue dogs and everything in between. You can't get diversity without getting ideological diversity. So then the question is, okay, you got the ideological diversity, but do we hang together on enough of the core principles? So what Ralph said was right earlier. The equality core, that's just like non-negotiable. I mean, that is just so key to who we are. And all my Dems, I mean, right now in the Senate, I mean, every Dem completely full LGBT equality. That's sort of shocking for Dems given where we've been on social issues. Every Dem out battling to save Roe versus Wade against a court that wants to overturn it or a president wants to put judges on the Supreme Court to overturn it. So the other core that I think that's kind of relevant to this one is I think Dems we believe in complete equality. Dems believe education is the great lifter and the great leveler. I mean, it's a lifter and it's a leveler, and that's why, again and again, if you poll people about Dems and ours, there's some things that maybe they like a little bit better about Republicans, but they'll always give Dems the preference, yeah, they support education more, because that is a core that unifies us all. I think there are some cores around, pay equity and raising the minimum wage and things like that unify us all. And then I think another thing that tends to unify us is as we look out at the world, we understand that American strength is not just about American strength, but it's about American strength in making allies, My worry about this President Trump America First thing is it's really America alone, and America alone isn't too strong. America alone is actually kind of weak if you're pushing your allies away. So I think just that there's a couple of core principles that, every moderate, Claire McCaskill, Bernie Sanders, Elizabeth Warren, we're like all rock solid on these core principles. Then there's going to be a lot of variation, but the variation is okay if when you look at somebody you think, I think they're telling me the way they really think it. If you think they're just telling you something out of a poll memo, or like some pollster or media person told them to say it, then you're not going to respect it and you won't be motivated by it. But if you think, yeah, that is who this person is, they're telling me the way they think it is, I think the authenticity piece is really key. Because Ralph, you faced this whole issue, like, are you too moderate a guy or whatever? I mean, and I always said about Ralph, can I say this about him? And he's won his race for governor by a bigger margin than I've ever won a race. So, but I can just say, Ralph is not what you would think of stereotypical politician, get on stage, give a really big stem-wanting speech. This guy was a pediatrician. This guy's had to sit at the bedside table of a whole lot of parents who were worried because their baby was ill. Their baby might be fatally ill. He has the bedside manner of that person, not the big, like super energetic guy. But he campaigned as who he was. He didn't try to be somebody else.
No, Tim, thank you. But I think Tim summarized everything very well. But it's all about us as Democrats having a large tent and needing to welcome people. And, personally, I feel so strongly that health care is a right. It's not a privilege. Maybe you disagree with that. I also feel very strongly about our economy, about education, about safe communities, clean environments, inclusivity. And so it's one of those things that if we have a large tent and we can agree that there may be one or two boxes that we can't both check off together, but that's okay. But as long as we look at the big picture and what we're trying to accomplish, I think that's the way we move forward. So whether someone has a label of being progressive or moderate or whatever, as long as they're under our tent, let's welcome them and move forward together. That's the approach that I would take.
All right. Thank you very much.
Great questions. Thank you, guys. Nice to be with you.